Consulting Group, Janet Crenshaw Smith, and she will be moderating this panel. Likewise, she will assist in introducing the remainder of the panelists. Welcome them, please.
Thank you, Erica, and good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All right, so spirited, so spirited. Again, my name is Janet Crenshaw Smith. I'm founding partner and president of Ivy Planning Group, and I am so happy to be with you. I managed to make it here yesterday afternoon to hear a little bit and share with you. I am a long-time part of the League of Black Women. It is an organization that is dear to my heart, and so I'm really honored to have been asked to host this panel. And part of it is like, what in the world does that mean? White House leverage for women through diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. Just quick background on who Ivy is and how this panel even came to be. Ivy is a 24-year-old consulting and training firm. So 24 years ago, 3 Ivy Leaguers came together to do strategic planning. That's how we got our name, Ivy Planning Group. I'd like to introduce, I'm one of the founders, I'd like to introduce one of the other founders, Gary Smith. Gary, are you still here? There he is in the back. All right, so Gary is another founder. Thank you, thank you. In addition to being my business partner of 24 years, we will celebrate 30 years of marriage next month. I don't know what you're planning, but it better be good, my brother. It better be good. Precious, right. So Ivy's, we started as a very traditional strategy firm, diverse, a core business strategy firm. We likened ourselves to be a mini McKinsey. And a few years after starting the company, we noticed that something really odd was happening. As we were sitting in the C-suite working with executives to drive core business, they would always notice that the 3 of us are people of color. In addition to being Ivy Leaguers, I'm a Harvard grad, Gary's a Yale grad, and our other partner is also a Harvard grad. All 3 of us are black. And so no matter what we were talking about in driving core business, they always wanted to know more about just our perspective on markets. You all know what I'm talking about, right? It always comes up. And so rather than ignore it, I said, you know what, we're going to launch a diversity practice, and we're going to do it the way that we do everything else that we're doing right now. We're going to look at new markets, we're going to figure out how to drive revenue, and we're going to leverage diversity to do that. And so that's what we set out to do in the mid-90s, and it quickly became our core business. So here we are today, and I'm delighted that yesterday on the afternoon panel was Cheryl Kern. I think Cheryl had to step out for a conference call. She'll be right back from Amway. The best of the best pick Ivy. Amway is one of them. And then also about 30% of our client set is not Fortune 500. It is government. And so this is the government panel. And 3 of my very favorite government clients are with us today. You're going to be meeting them. We have Tony Barnes from NRC, Carolyn Taylor from GAO, and Dave Harmon from Federal Reserve Board. And you're going to meet each and every one of them. But why do I even care about government, and why should you? Just real quick background. Wow, the hope that maybe you all felt, but certainly I felt when I was sitting there with Sandra. Where is she? We were sitting there watching that inauguration, the first one and the second one. Here we are, finally, being able to realize that this is an America that includes all of us. And the one thing that I want you to know is that no employer hires more people than the government. We may not think about that. We talk about the Walmarts, and I'm all for Walmart. We talk about Yum Brands. Hey, so are we, amen. All right. We talk about all of these other employers, but the one thing that we cannot forget is that nobody hires more than the government, fed, local, or state. And also, it's particularly important for Black people. And so let's think about this. 21.2% of all black workers are public employees compared with 16.3% of non-black. If you haven't read the works of Claude Anderson, he does Powernomics. He wrote a book early called Black Labor, White Wealth. Read it. Because he talked about the fact that the public sector is the sector that hires black people, promotes black people, pays black people. With that in mind, whenever I hear people dogging government workers, I pause and go, I wonder if that's supposed to mean something about me. So I want you to think about that, because disproportionately, black people work for government, and we also get paid. The median wage earned by black employees is significantly higher than the private sector. In other words, black folk get paid better in government than they do in the private sector overall, right? And so pay attention to that. It also, if you look at the 5 top industries, disproportionately being paid well. So we got to pay attention to government because it's paying attention to us. It's a huge opportunity. And so the hope seriously came alive for all of us when President Obama signed Executive Order 13583. In short, it was saying that the hope is there, and now we're going to make sure that we have what we need, the policy in place to make sure that we are hiring, promoting, developing, elevating this diverse workforce that is government. And so our panel knows about that more than anybody else. I'm going to move away so that you can learn more from each of them. We are going to start with Ms. Carolyn Taylor, who is the Chief Human Capital Officer at GAO. Carolyn.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Does anyone here know about GAO? Oh, okay. All right. It is the Government Accountability Office. We used to be known as the General Accounting Office. In our history, we were focused a lot on accounting. It is still the foundation for GAO, but we do much more. So we are welcoming all backgrounds, not just accounting people. So if you're looking for a job, let me know. GAO is also known as the government, a congressional watchdog. We are part of the legislative branch of the government. Our mission is to support the Congress in meeting its constitutional responsibilities. We do this through providing the Congress with timely, fact-based, nonpartisan, non-ideological, fair and balanced information. We issue over 1,000 reports generally each year. We do our work through auditing agency operations. We are out there trying to make sure your tax dollars are being well spent. We investigate allegations of fraud and abuse or improper activities. We report on how well the government is doing. We perform policy analysis and offer options. We do not make policy, but we will review some policy options. And we also issue a variety of legal decisions. Our work has led to various laws and changes in the government, and each year we save billions with a B. Wrong way, sorry. We have offices in 12 cities across the country. Most of our folks are in DC, our headquarters, but we do have folks in 11 other cities, so if you're not from DC, we could still welcome you in another city. We have about 2,900 employees. Our workforce is very diverse. Right now, in total, about 58% of our workforce are women. And I am proud to say that 48% of our senior executive service are women as well. I also am proud to say that about 12.2% of our senior executives are women of color. That is a fact that we are proud of. It is not, we haven't had that fact for long. Many of those women made it into the SES in the last 5 years or so. So things are improving. Just to also mention a few other facts about our workforce, about 56% are 40 and over. We have overall 32% of our workforce are minorities. We know, or from their own reporting, about 4% of our staff are members of the LGBT community, and about 4% have identified themselves as persons with disabilities. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that everything isn't some other facts. We have about 89% of the people in our lower paying jobs are also women. So that's a problem that we want to work on. In the government, there are many of us who participate in the Partnership for Public Service Best Places to Work program, and I am pleased to say the GAO has done well. In 2013, we were number 3 overall, and in 2012, we were number 2. But we have been number 1 in support for diversity actually for the last 3 years, and we've only competed in the last 3 years. I will tell you that it takes, thank you. But that takes a lot of work. We have a multi-pronged approach, and we have been working on diversity since the 90s, beginning with supporting various employee groups, having training, and also having support from the top. The leadership has to be on board or it doesn't work very well. But many, many efforts over many, many years. I mentioned earlier that GAO issues lots of reports, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of those that might be of interest to you. Some recent trends in the civilian employment and compensation. Overall, it still says what Janet mentioned before, we get paid well, but could be paid better. There are some retirement security issues that women face. That's another report that we issued in 2012. The other one that I want to mention, and actually there's a more recent one than the 2009 one at the bottom, there is still a pay gap. Women are still getting paid less than men. So there are some issues that we need to work on collectively as we move on. And with that, I think I am now to turn it over to my colleague. Yes, thank you.
Good morning. How's everybody? So we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve. Does everybody heard about the Federal Reserve? We're not in the news very often. Does anybody happen to know who our new leader is? It's not Ben Bernanke anymore, right? It's what? Janet Yellen, right? What's interesting about that? First woman, right? So arguably one of the top 3 most powerful women in the U.S. right now. So it's really a privilege to work for Janet. And for those of you that are in HR or in diversity, she's normal, right? And that's key when you're working for these top executives. So I want to just spend a little bit of time. My background, 25 years in corporate America, and I've only come over to the government sector in the last 2 years. In June, it'll be my 2nd year here at the Fed. So I'm still adjusting to things like procurement. But it's been interesting to see the difference, because there is some differences between corporate America and the way that the federal government works. Now, the interesting thing about the Federal Reserve, or the Fed, is we're not appropriated like the other government agencies. So we have our own compensation system, which pays better. So if you're interested in coming to work for the best government agency, please see me. So about the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve, we're celebrating our 100th year this year, so we had a little bit of celebration around our 100th year, but given some of the other things that got in the news over the last couple of years, we didn't celebrate too big. A little bit of ice cream sandwiches, I think, was the extent of our celebration. So that's that. The second piece is, it's really an interesting thing that we have the Board of Governors, which you would think of as like corporate, but then there's these 12 regional banks. But they're autonomous. They don't directly have to listen to what the Board of Governors say, and that's what the whole system is built on. So even though Janet sits at the top of the organization, there's really not one boss at the Federal Reserve. We have the Board of Governors, and all the appropriate divisions report into different governors in the Board of Governors. So trying to get decisions made is quite interesting at the Federal Reserve. There's a lot of consensus building, a lot of relationship building, and we can probably talk about that more later, about how you can build success. So Janet Yellen, as I said, is the chair, 20,000 employees plus across the country. The role of the Federal Reserve, try to make it in its simplest form, is maximize employment, and that's really taking on a bigger role with Janet taking over versus Chairman Bernanke. Stabilization of prices, and then trying to make sure we have moderate long-term interest rates. So those are the 3 big things that we worry about. There's a bunch of other things around compliance that we do with all of the banks that we use to make sure that they're doing things the right way. But that's the basis of the Federal Reserve. We're located across the country. We're in 12 different locations. You've heard of many of those banks. In many of the big cities, you can't miss them because they're generally fairly large and elaborate buildings. Atlanta is probably the best of all of them. So shout out to Atlanta, I guess. And again, if you'd like to work there, come see me afterwards. The Federal Reserve Board here in Washington, D.C., we have about 2,500 employees. We're in 3 different locations within D.C. One is on Constitution Ave, which everybody knows about, and there's actually a building right behind it, and there's actually a tunnel that connects the two. So it's actually one building, if anybody's reading into the fine detail. New York Avenue is our other building, and then we're on K Street, our newest location. And we have shuttles that run every 15 minutes, so it really makes it convenient to work there. As I said before, we're an independent agency, not appropriated, so we get to do some things. We take the best of the government. Because we have 400 plus PhDs in economics, we have a little bit of an academic culture, and then we have a little bit of a corporate culture. So it's an interesting mix, and we're trying to take the best from all 3 and try to get rid of the worst from all 3. So we're making some strides there, but it's a continuum there. And then, like most of the other agencies, we have to report up through Congress on what we're doing. Benefits, we are really working hard, especially in the last 2 years, to become an employer of choice. So we're really working on the employee life side of things, trying to understand, hey, the government has limits on what we can do from a compensation standpoint, so what can we do to make your life easier? And that ranges from simple things around dry cleaning and activities that we can offer to elder care and things of that nature. So we're really trying to raise the bar on some of the additional benefits. Our workforce, a couple of interesting facts for folks, and I think many of us, when you think about the Federal Reserve, you think, wow, there's a bunch of 60-year-old folks that have been there forever. And quite frankly, that was the thought of the executives at the Federal Reserve until we started providing them with data, right? So about half of our workforce is under the age of 44. About half, right? That's an interesting figure. The other thing that was interesting is how long have folks worked at the board? About almost half, 45%, have worked there less than 5 years. Right? So you talk about a culture that's changing, you talk about a culture that's kind of getting with the times. We're really going through an evolution at the board. And when we say this to potential folks coming in, I get the same response that this room just had was, whoa, right? It gives you, now paints a different picture, right? Because it's not this old stodgy environment. There's people there that want to make change, bringing in good talent from all over, and it's really, we're really focused on the environment. And Janet Yellen is deeply focused. I've had more meetings, collective time, meeting with Janet Yellen in her first 3 months in office than I did with Chairman Bernanke in the year and a half before Janet took over. So, and Janet, we have a lot of conversations, because I used to work at Time Warner as well, and we talk a lot about her dealing with the media, because she gets stressed out about the media a little bit. And I said, if your name was John Yellen, you wouldn't get as much media, but your name is Janet, and people are interested about a strong, powerful leader who happens to be a female. And we had a good discussion, because everybody wants to interview her. That Vogue called, Glamour called. And if you know Janet's like, that's not what I'm about, right? If they want to do an article about me being a great leader who happens to be a female, we will do that. I'm not going to do an article about me being a female who's a leader, right? So it's an interesting little shift there, but it's very important. So she'll do the Time magazine interview, she'll do Fortune, she'll do The Economist. And she said, and we talked about it, and we said, maybe year 8, when you're winding down, then maybe you do the Glamour and the Vogue and the, right? And then start setting things up for your future. But the first couple of years, really, it's all about her. She's got the economy to run. The last time I checked, the U.S. economy wasn't perfect yet. So we got a little bit of work left to do. So a couple last things. From an HR standpoint, when I got there, HR, the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Legal, they didn't even talk to each other, right? So the first order of business was to get us to work together, because we can't make any change unless the 3 of us are working hand in hand to make change. The second, and what I've talked to my staff about, is changing the DNA of how we do things, right? So having diversity sit on top doesn't usually work. And I was taught this by Maurice over at Pepsi. You got to build it into the organization. So we are dissecting every process and making change, and what I call building diversity in and changing the DNA. So performance management process. I now run data, and I share it with the division directors of, hey, if we had 17% of our workforce was extraordinary, what percent of our black workforce was extraordinary? What percent of our Hispanic workforce was extraordinary? These are now becoming regular reports, part of the performance management process. right? Not an after the fact. We do it real time before final ratings are given, right? I spent a year and a half fixing our compensation system. We went through and pulled data and compared every individual at the board. Am I running over? Or is this good? Okay. So, but I think this is important. This is important for companies to understand. We went through and looked at everything compensation-wide. I pulled data, and so employee X, we'll call her Jane, we looked at every employee and said, okay, what is Jane's average salary versus everybody else in her grade level? What is Jane's average salary versus everybody else in her job title? What is Jane's salary versus everybody else in her division? What is Jane's salary given her last 3 years of performance ratings, right? And we pulled all that data and sat with each division director and said, hey, you have some anomalies here and let's fix it. We spent $3.5 million fixing things that weren't right. And that was going to the Board of Governors, and I said, things aren't right, we're going to fix it. And we fixed it. And it was for everybody, but guess what? The large majority of what we fixed was not for the white employees. It was for the non-white employees. But we're making progress, right? The salary reading process for folks coming in. We value the job, not the person, because society hasn't fixed female and minorities from a salary standpoint yet. So if you're always giving a 10 or 15% increase based on what they made, you're just compounding the problem when they get to the Fed. And if everybody gets a 5% increase year over year, over time, instead of being $20,000 ahead of you, I'm going to be $30,000 ahead of you, right? So now let's value the job. And guess what? Maybe the white guy, Dave, gets a 9% increase coming in, and you get a 15% increase coming in. But we're both going to start at 105, because that's what the job's worth. If you don't fix that up front, you're not going to fix it. So these are just some examples, and we can talk later about all the stuff that we're changing, but it's building it into the DNA of the processes. And when you build fair processes, that changes the dynamics for a lot of things, right? So that's some of the stuff that we're doing. I know I ran over a little bit. I'm going to turn it over. Thanks.
You guys expect me to follow that? Wow. First of all, thank you for the warm welcome this morning. When I came in, I saw your beautiful and talented CEO, and she walked up to me and took my hand and looked in my eye. I love to be handshaken and looked in the face when you shake my hand, as opposed to, nice to meet you. And then, you know, I'm a happily married man, been married for 32 years come December. But it sure feels good to be in a room full of beautiful black women like yourself. I tell you what, Janet, I didn't know how much I was going to enjoy this panel until this morning. I got to tell you, I'm enjoying this. I'm not in Rockville. There are more old white males in my organization than any organization in America. I'm convinced of it. That's the nature of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I am going to show you a little bit of commercial here about what we do and who we are, to tell you and educate you a little bit more about this, because it is a white male-dominated career path that needs to be infused with women of color, men of color, Americans of color, etc. And that's not an indictment on white males, but you go 30 years ago, and who were the only nuclear scientists and engineers in America? They were retired Navy submarine nuclear power guys. And that's what our agency looked like across the top. It takes time for that to make its through to retirement. But I'm a 31-year retiree from the Navy. I flew airplanes, having way too much fun. Thank you. Having way too much fun flying around the world, enjoying life, and now I'm working for a living. Let's go this way. And so we're headquartered in Rockville, Maryland, but we have 4 regional offices. King of Prussia, Lisle, which is Chicago, Arlington, which is really Dallas, Atlanta, right downtown Atlanta. And so that's pretty much spread across, and then you slice and dice America to do our mission. So many may know about nuke power plants, and you know that you have to be very careful and strict about regulating the use of them and the building of them and the licensing of them. But very few people know a little bit more, which is where we're located. There's 106 nuclear power plants, or former nuclear power plants, that still protect the spent fuel and spent fuel pools across America. Maybe one closer to you than you realize, but there's a bunch of them. The youngest operating plant today is 30 years old. That's how well they're built. That's how well the industry is regulated. But there are 4 under construction right now. If you live near Augusta, Georgia, There are 2 being built in the Vogel plant and the Summer plant there. But in addition to the nuclear power plants, you're around more nuclear stuff than you realize. We also regulate the use of all medical. Anybody know what oncology is? All of that nuclear machines that give you radiation treatment, et cetera. Those are all regulated by us as well. So finding new uranium sources, you have to also, those things just don't go away when you're done using them. You have to be able to protect them and treat them properly. We coordinate with a lot of other government agencies. It's just the nature of the government today. No one is a single sphere anymore. You work across many government lines. So you can see there, Justice, FAA, DOE, Department of Energy, and EPA, probably 2 of our closest partners. And so here's my commercial about the best places to work in the federal government. Ranked number 1 for one I think is so important to you, regardless of what you look like, is number 1 in work-life balance. We have every kind of flexible work schedule you can imagine. I work 4 days a week, 10 hours a day, so Monday through Thursday, and I have a 3-day weekend every weekend. I'm digging that. Number 1 among females. Number 1 among employees under 40. Number 1 among African American employees. 15% of our agency is African American. Now, a large portion of that is technical and scientists, but too much of a large portion of that is administrative and HR and otherwise. So we're working on that. This is one program I want to just tell you about. I know there are some students in the room. The students, raise your hands. Some students still here? If you're in the science or engineering field, you want to pay attention to this one. We bring in recent graduates within 2 years of either obtaining a bachelor's or a master's degree in a technical field. Whether you have, and some of them come in with PhDs. Many come in with PhDs to work engineering, the scientific, or the health physics track. Very competitive program. At one time, we brought in 52 a year when the industry was telling us they wanted to grow, to as little as 2 years ago, only 9 from across the nation. Building that back up into the mid-20s this year. But here's the neat part about this. These are starting salaries for new college graduates coming into the federal government in this NSPDP program. So the first year, as you can see, with a master's degree, $66K, and these are non-competitive promotions to $71, to $77, to $89, to $92,000 after working 5 years in the federal government. I think those are probably pretty competitive with just about anybody, maybe more competitive than anybody. And if you happen to have a doctorate degree, you see what happens. You get nearly to 6 figures within 5 years as shown on board. And doesn't mean that your first year you necessarily even have to come in as an 11. With a PhD in a very highly sought after nuclear engineering, mechanical engineering, you may come in as a 13 and go 11, 12, 13 within 3 years. So many people have discounted the federal government, and Jen did a great job of explaining to you, it is a great place to work. There are lots of jobs for those that want to work hard in them, and you can't beat the packages. I talked about flexible work schedule. There's a gentleman that I work with who is not even a single father. He's married with a wife, and he works from home from 7:30 to 9 o'clock. He takes the kids to school. He goes to the office by 9:30. He works until 3 o'clock. He goes and picks the kids up from school and then finishes the rest of his 9-hour workday from home as well. We have people that work live in West Virginia and come to the office once a month for a monthly meeting, but they do work from home. And that's a work-life balance. That's a flexible work schedule. That's a great retirement package. I won't continue on. I'm not from HR. I'm from, but I could be. And so that's what this is all about, this idea that, and I said it out front in conversation, black women are empowered. Black women are successful in just about everything in every sector of the nation. And so don't discount what can happen at the federal government, because ever since the president signed this executive order, And I'm happy to say that we had a comprehensive diversity management plan in place long before the president ordered our agency to do so. So I'm the author of our strategic plan, and I wrote it in 2 weeks because I had been doing everything that OPM said do long before the president said do it. The only thing I didn't have in place was a diversity council, and I now have that. So in 100% compliance. And I look forward to more interaction and questions later. Thank you.
So as you can see, we have quite the panel for you, quite the experts for you. And I don't know about you, I'm sold. I'm ready to go work for. Right? This will not be the kind of panel where you have me as the moderator being the only one asking questions. Please start to write down your questions now because we want to hear from you. But I will launch with one. So what is the state of the union for careers for Black women, in your opinion? What is it like for us? Why don't I start with you, Carolyn?
I think the state of the union these days, it's echoing a little bit.
So,
I think things are looking good. I can look over the last, I've been working for a long time. I can look back and see that there are many, many more women coming up, many, many more women in place in senior levels. So I think that things are really looking good. I also can see, as I mentioned, I think one of our reports is about the pay gap, that's being reduced. There's even a pay gap in the federal government, but that's being reduced as well. So various places, things are looking up, things are looking good. I think we both talked a little bit about the one area that we want to work on. Too many women are still in our administrative lower paying jobs. So we need to work on finding bridging opportunities for those people to move them up to other positions and to have developmental opportunities for them to move along. Okay.
Dave?
I would echo what Carolyn said, and I would add on a couple more things. As women are moving up, if they've started in the administrative ranks, we need to find a way to get their salaries to the same level when they're in the same jobs, when they take on executive roles or management roles. So that's a challenge, I think, for us moving forward. The other great news is, as the pipeline is building, as Carolyn spoke about, but the next 5 to 7 years, there's going to be a gap, and we talked about this outside, there's going to be a gap in senior leadership. So it's a great time for folks now to move up and move through the organization because as all these boomers are going into retirement, we don't have enough quality talent to backfill. So it's a great opportunity for folks right now that are in the workforce that are on the cusp of taking on leadership roles. It really is a good time.
I'll echo that, and I think that the state of the opportunity is great. The state of the supply in certain sectors, not so great. There are not enough women of color going to college and majoring in the hard sciences in order to qualify for the boomers, the white male boomers that are leaving industry will be supplanted by white females because there's not enough women of color who are going to college and getting the hard sciences, electrical engineering, chemical engineering, nuclear engineering, so that supply will not meet the demand that's there. The opportunities will be there. But when we turn around and look to hire women of color, I point you towards the National Science Foundation report on women and minorities in engineering and science report from last year. They do one every 2 years. And it talks about there are more women in college today than men. There are more women graduating from college today than men. There are more women in the engineering and science disciplines in college today than men. But women aren't taking those degrees into the workforce industry. They're taking them to classrooms or they're taking them to raise families instead. And so the supply is not meeting the demand, in my opinion.
Thank you. Do I have a question in the audience before I move on? Any questions in the audience? Yes, ma'am.
So you can call me Dave. That's easier than the guy from the Fed.
Did everybody hear that? That was funny.
Probably not white anymore, probably red at this point. So, great question, and the honest answer is I was tricked, actually. I had worked at AOL for 10 years, and it was pretty grind. It was 120, 130 hours a week, and I was done with corporate America and the greed, quite frankly, and I wanted to do something mission value-based. So, as we spoke about earlier, I took some time off, traveled, coached my kids, did a lot of fun family stuff. And when I was getting back in the workforce, I was working with some search firms, and we were talking to a bunch of different companies. I almost took a job with the Special Olympics because I thought that was going to be a great role. But long story short, the headhunter said, "Hey, what are you doing next Friday?" And I said, "Nothing." She goes, "How about you meet me in DC for lunch?" And I'm like, "Okay." And I told her in the beginning, I absolutely do not want to work for the government. I absolutely don't want to work for the government. Because I had the stereotype of what you hear versus what's actually there. And so she said, "Okay." And I said, "Where's lunch?" She goes, "Well, it's at the Federal Reserve." I said, "Oh." So I walk in, and it was a group interview with about a dozen folks, half of which were PhD economists. But it was a great meeting. It was supposed to be an hour-and-a-half meeting. I think we spent 4 hours, and I was hooked because it was just, it's different than what you think it is. The talent level was much higher. I mean, to work with 400 or 500 PhD economists who, by the way, coming out of college, for those of you coming out of college, if you get your PhD as an economist, it's a 6-figure plus starting salary at the Federal Reserve. Okay? So much like the sciences, there's opportunity there, and we are lacking in people of color for economists, truly, across the country. It's an issue. So anyway, had that conversation, and my biggest concern coming in was the adjustment of going from 25 years in corporate America to working at the Federal Reserve Board. But I'll tell you one thing that's important. This is for anybody, and especially college kids, starting a new role. I had 3 or 4 mentors that they hooked me up with coming in. Men and women, people of color, not people of color, that helped me navigate through, helped me understand, do this, don't do that, here's how the culture works. And I would say that's great advice for anybody coming in.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Let me ask you all a question, because it's just us, it's like family. What trends are you noticing that are impacting the success of Black women in the workplace, both negatively and positively? What are you seeing? What's important?
Well, I'll start answering that one, and I want to dovetail on what Dave just said. And if you were at the previous panel, it kind of has a bit to talk about there, and is that the trends is that we believe that mentorship is the most important thing we can do. Got to get a mentor, got to get a mentor, got to get a mentor. Well, it is important. Don't get me wrong. But I think that we're being over-mentored and under-sponsored. It is sponsorship that gets you to the level of rising in the agency. Whatever your job is, it doesn't matter what you do. You have to have sponsorship to help get that next level. Because I'll give you 3 quick definitions. Mentorship, to me, that's a conversation. You participate in that with your mentor. I think you should do this. Oh, I want to do that. I want to get this kind of job, do this kind of training. Then I'll define what I think coaching is. Coaching is like the guy on the sideline and the team out there. That's one-way communication. You're being told what to do. Get a master's degree. Find a mentor. Do that. That's a coach. But then there's that sponsor. That's the person that speaks for you because you're not around when that conversation is happening. And so I think the trending is adding to your mentorship piece a sponsorship piece that is so important on getting us to the next level.
And I would like to just mention, I think you need both a mentor and a coach and a sponsor, because you need at least one mentor who knows you. You need one mentor who knows the organization. So you need to have that advice coming from a variety of angles to make sure that things are moving along. I'd also mention, you asked about things, and I don't know if it's a trend or a factor. Yeah. Think about your leadership style and look at the cues that you get from others with that style. One of the things I've noticed over the years is that sometimes as women, we will use the collaborative approach, and sometimes that's seen as weak. So be careful to use that iron fist when you need to.
Absolutely. But
definitely stay true to your own style and use that collaborative approach, because it certainly builds in, buy-in, and it helps with your staff development and support. But look at the cues and make sure that the others that you're working with or working for understand and appreciate your style. But be flexible and change when you need to.
Dave, anything to add?
So I would just add, I think the trend in understanding EQ, play on the Q, those folks that have a higher EQ seem to be doing better, and I will tell you that the good companies are changing their performance management system to not just measure what you do, but how you do it. And if you find those organizations that care about how you do it, females in general have an advantage there.
Yes.
Because for the most part, what I've seen in my career, at least one person's opinion, is more flexible to your point in your style, and allowed to be more flexible in your style, right? So I think that's important. And so mentoring, sponsoring, coaching, whatever it is, I think the important thing is find somebody who cares about you, right? If you find somebody who cares about you, they're going to have those conversations when you're not there. They're going to support you when you're not there. So that's important, and that doesn't happen overnight. So it's tough to find that, but when you find that, don't let it go. Even if you go to another company, they're going to be so invaluable to your career.
Any other questions out here in the audience? Any other questions? Okay, yes.
I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on how to go about closing the wage gap that we always hear about and talk about? And I heard something recently that the problem with the wage gap is that there is really no wage gap, that it's based on choices, career choices that women make versus men make. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, before that answer, let me tell you my thought about that. Because I'm self-employed, so I don't have a boss that's going to jump on. Y'all don't need to admit. Yeah, you do. Back in the day, people used to get together and talk about wages, how much you're making, what you're doing. I went straight to IBM, and one of the first things that happened is a group of the old brothers and sisters got us together and talked about, now what was your starting salary? And told us whether it was high enough or low enough, all right? So that we would share that. So now there's just a lot of, I don't know, and in fact, most people that I know of color think they're making more than other folks are, and they're making less. I'm hired by the company, I can't tell. But you all can talk to each other about it. So, you know, we get puffed up and think we're all that. You know what I'm saying? And we get real puffed up, and we are bad. However, we may not be paid as much. Now, that's just the Janet sidebar. What do you all have to say?
Well, that's really a hard question for the federal sector, because a GS 13 Step 10 in Washington, D.C. in one agency and a GS 13 Step 10 in D.C. another agency make the same, with very few differences. It's a pay scale, but that's not to say that a pay gap doesn't exist, because you could have two managers who are in the same agency. One's a GS 15 Step 6 and the other one is GS 14 Step 4. Why are two managers doing essentially the same job, managing the same number of people, working the same number of hours on two different pay levels? And so recently, the federal government, just last year, I think, for Ochicos, I just happen to know this because they made me a part of the team, even though I didn't really want to be there. We did this entire study across the entire federal government with a mandatory report back to either OMB or one of the OPM, Office of Personnel Management. Every agency had to look internally and look at their processes, because I can read her application and I can read her application, and when they come into the company, I could give them two different assignment levels, job levels, even though they're totally equal in other ways. And it's really hard to say someone is equal in absolutely every way. But there's an HR specialist that sits down and decides what level that person comes into the company. That's where it usually starts, the unequalness. And then if you start unequal, you're going to continue unequal on it. And we did, in fact, find some, males that had come from other companies, an AOL or American Express or whatever else, and someone who come in from a different government agency starting in hours, and they started at different levels. And so you have to, it's up to your company. I'm not sure how the individual affects that. I think it's more important that the company take that on as an issue and fix it from the top down.
Well, let me mention, as I mentioned before, GAO is in the legislative branch. We are also not part of the, we have our own personnel authority. We have pay bands, and we do have authority to pay people at different rates.
That's why
So
folks love working for you.
Yes, they do. For example, our entry-level people come into our developmental program. It's a 2-year program. You get evaluated every 6 months, and you can get a raise every 6 months. So it is important, I think, for everyone to take it on as their own responsibility to ask about the pay. We have a responsibility to be forthright and honest with you. Ask me if you come to work for GAO, is this the pay rate that comparable for other people coming in with a master's degree in public administration? I have a responsibility to tell you yes. So please ask. But we are able to pay differently. We're not tied to the GS schedule. We have a separate pay bands, and we have opportunities to make pay decisions differently.
And there are just a handful of agencies that do
Yes.
that. The FDIC is another one.
Yes.
We had a guy leave my agency as a GS 14, and he went to the FDIC also as a GS 14, but in that capacity, he makes more than 15s in my agency over here. So those are a little
Some
disparities.
flexibilities,
Yeah.
yes.
So let me take a different slant. First of all, I think you really do want to be an HR guy.
Clearly.
So
Clearly.
I think from an individual standpoint, you have to take ownership of your own career, right? And what I would tell everybody is, first of all, whatever group you're in that you work with, if you're the best at what you do, start there, right? Then it's an easy conversation. Then you go to your boss and say, I'm the best at what I do, so let's talk about my pay. Right? The other thing I've seen over time is white males have no problem going to their boss and asking for more.
Yep.
That's not the case with everybody else, right? So take control of your own careers, ask for data, provide data. Here's why I'm better. Dave, white guy sitting next to me is making 100 widgets a day. I'm cranking out 130, right? My customer service, feedback has been 97, 98%. Dave's is 91, et cetera, et cetera. When you go to your boss with data, it's a much easier conversation. When you go to your boss as the best in your work group, it's a much easier conversation. Take control of it. Don't wait for somebody to control your salary or your career. Own it.
Thank you. How should I come to you to say that, Dave? How do I come to you and say, I'm just better? Or I'm the same, and I'm
Just
getting
as good.
paid less? Because I don't think, why do I have to be better than? Why can't I just be as good as average Joe Blow and get paid what average Joe Blow does? Now, clearly, I can't come to you that way.
Well, let me just tell you that I have had people come to me just that way. And usually it's in an email, it's a little less personal, but they have, I understand that my colleague down the hall got paid X, Y, and Z, and I got paid A, B, C. Please explain to me what happened. Was there a mistake made? They put it in a very lovely way. Or what were the factors that were considered? So I had to prepare a specific answer with the data and satisfy that person. So it was very honest and open.
That's good. Was there a mistake?
No mistake. Was there a mistake? No, we didn't. We did not make a mistake.
The question was, did it get changed?
No.
So
Yes.
to back on that, because I have a long career in HR and in diversity work, primarily in talent management, leadership development, recruiting, so on and so forth. So especially in private industry, I've worked for organizations where there is a policy in place, but if you discuss salary openly with your colleagues, that's grounds for termination.
Yes.
So how do you handle a situation like that? And I've managed MBA rotational programs for one of the largest Fortune 500 companies in the U.S. and have looked at and have had responsibility for the pay scales and looked at, okay, well, this group came out of state colleges, UNC, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to pay and am required to pay the Harvard grad $20,000, $30,000 more a year, or the Yale grad
Don't hate.
$20,000.
Yeah.
I'm not and they all have MBAs.
Yes.
But then also looking at, this group went straight from undergrad to grad, no work experience, but the Harvard grad may have 3 to 5 years work experience under her belt, white female, and can get paid, so it's justifiable to pay them more. But you do have companies, corporations out there that do have those policies in place. And so how do you handle that?
You wanted to say something here?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is it's just hard to do this as individuals.
Yep.
The idea as an individual that you're going to take on your organization, either because the rules don't let you, or just style-wise, I don't know that I want to walk in and say, I'm underpaid. I think the real opportunity is actually actually a systemic opportunity. And I think that's why, I mean, for example, you can talk to a chief diversity officer and say, have we done an equity audit on past? I mean, that's a real simple request. You can just say, I think we ought to study compensation, and you're not saying for you. You're not asking, I think I'm underpaid. You're saying, I'd like to see the results of the last compensation study, and if it just so happens that women are underpaid, then that's going to be captured.
Yeah.
So some of this is just riding on the systems that are already built to fix these problems. But we have to make sure we hold the people accountable who have the jobs where they could say yes to doing that. An equity audit is a choice. I mean, an organization can decide to do an equity audit against compensation or not. If your organization hasn't done one, nudge, push, encourage, and say, why not? And that's where we just have to hold the people that have those jobs accountable and also give them the leverage and the power to do what they often want to do. So if you're the chief diversity officer, you want to do an equity audit, but sometimes your organization isn't happy to have you do one. Well, if you say, look, the workforce is really clamoring about this, there's a real, real concern that maybe we're underpaying some people, do the equity audit, prove that there's no problem, or find that there is, and then use that data to have everybody benefit. Just not it.
Thanks, Gary. And we have found that when we do that equity audit, we don't always call it that, because Cheryl and we said, wait, we're going to call it something else, Janet, when we do this thing. But we have found that the senior executives, it does open their eyes, because quite often they really don't know, because that conversation may not be happening.
So I don't know if we
Yes.
answered your question, right? So I want to go back to as an individual,
Yes.
how do we approach this? I go back to the EQ statement I made earlier, right? You have to understand your boss. Is your boss a creative type? Is your boss an analytical type? Is your boss like to operate on email? Does your boss like to operate in person, et cetera? I'm always a big fan of break bread, right? Take them out to breakfast, take them out to lunch, get them to a neutral zone first, him or her. Get them to a neutral zone first, have that conversation, and then say, how am I doing? And then what do I need to do to be the best? And make them own that.
Yep.
Right? So you're not talking about anybody else, but what do I need to do the best? And then once they answer, if you say you are the best, then say, okay, can we have a quick conversation about my compensation? If you're not, then you need that. Now you have marching orders of what you need to do to be the best, and then you come back in 6 months and say, hey, I'm doing this now. What else do I need to do to be the best? Right? And I think that's not always going to work, because some bosses just won't talk about it. They'll say, go talk to HR, or, But to the extent you get them in a neutral zone over breakfast or lunch or something, go to, those two are cheaper than dinner, so, take them. Earlier is better. And if you catch them early in the day, they don't have 20 things in their head, right? So breakfast is always the best. They haven't started their workday. Meet them for breakfast. But I think have that individual conversation. Say, I love you as a boss. I love working here. All that stuff you got to do.
We don't talk love at work.
Start sucking up, right? That's true.
You guys are HR, that's what you do, right?
All right, driving in, I was listening to the Steve Harvey show, and once again, we're talking about the Housewives of Atlanta. The fight. The fight. For those of you that don't watch the Housewives of Atlanta, you don't watch it, it is, now it is all black women in the cast, right? Yeah, it is. It's all black women. Many of them are professionals. They are successful in their own right. Some of them are actually housewives, some aren't. In the reunion show, just like all the reality shows do these reunions, there was a fight. There was a fight, and so people are talking about it. So here's the question, as we look at these kinds of current events, do you think this impacts our careers at work? Is this something that shows up, or do people just know, well, that's just TV. That's not all people. What do you think?
Well, oddly enough, just a week or so, I was also driving on the Beltway, listening to the Steve Harvey Morning Show, because this conversation has been going on now ever since it happened a couple of weeks ago. And there was a caller that called in that I think, usually I'm not usually impressed by some of the folks that call in to some of those shows. But this individual, what he said really stuck with me. And he said, I believe the quote is Malcolm X, who said, "He who controls your image controls your destiny." And so I think that since that fight happened and since they were talking about that, the image of black women have been tainted. The ugly angry black female syndrome has been out there way too long anyway. But these two beautiful, successful, somewhat intelligent
Portia?
women on national television had this physical altercation. And that discourse has been continuing around. And it's in the workplace, it's in the supermarket, it's on the playground, it's everywhere. And so, absent of even that fight, the words still resound with me. Is that if in your corporation, if in your company or your agency, black women have had visible issues, it will affect you just like it affects those women, be it an argument over salary, be it I'm disgruntled because I think I was discriminated against and I'm going to make a very visual, instead of taking the process and making the process work for you, you instead go to all your colleagues and turn it into an office-wide, an agency-wide issue about your particular issue. It can taint, even though it's not even you, it's somebody, it's a colleague, it can taint the image that you have as a black woman, or if it happens between two men, it taints the men, but the image is tainted when those kind of things happen.
What do you think, Carolyn?
Yes, I was going to just mention that. I think we're all still looked at as a group. The black women, the Asian women, the Hispanic women. So anything that happens to one happens to all. I'd also say it's important to think about the extent to which we share personal information. Not, my view, not a good thing. It often, I've seen it come back to haunt people later on in their lives. The things that are, you trust a few people, but mostly it's important to keep a lot of your personal business to yourself.
Absolutely.
Keep it at home, keep it with your family. So yes, all of those things out there spill over into the workplace and follow us forever.
What do you think, Dave?
Career advice, don't go on reality TV. We'll start.
Don't go on reality TV.
Good advice.
That's a good. So I just want to say one quick thing, and especially for the folks that are starting their careers. This is what I tell the interns that come when I was at Pepsi, when I was at AOL, when I'm at the Fed. Yeah, I say, your career is a poker game, and I'm oversimplifying it. It's a poker game. You have your experience, your education, your performance, your image, and your interpersonal skills. If you have aces in all 5 of those, you're going to be in pretty good shape.
Thank you. Any questions out there in the audience? This side, yes.
There was,
Yeah, we need Dave's list again. What was it?
So the 5 things: experience, education, your performance/potential, your image, and your interpersonal skills. And you could probably make that /EQ. You work on those 5 things, I guarantee you, you'll be fine in your careers.
Thank you. Question.
Okay, my question is in reference to a comment that Captain Barnes made, but anybody can chime in to answer. So earlier you were talking about the supply not meeting the demand with African American women that practice or go to school for technical fields, and they get out of college and then they go into these other fields that don't have anything to do with their degrees. I guess my question is, what do you suggest, or what is your opinion of why that is happening? And the reason I ask that is because I went to school for a technical field. I was an engineering major. And I have a lot of colleagues that were engineering majors as well, African American women. Now, when I graduated, I did not have a job at the time. And so I stayed, I just stayed consistent and prayed that God bring me the job that I want. But I have a lot of colleagues that weren't able to do that. So they are, what you mentioned, they might have went into education or another field that might have been, I guess, more eager to hire students at the time.
Yep.
So I guess my question is, why do you think that we have that problem?
That's a great question. Absolutely wonderful
Because we want to fix it, because I have colleagues
Absolutely.
now that are in school, and whatever advice I can give them from you guys, so we can bridge that gap, we need to do it. So
Great question, and I will answer it this way. If I absolutely knew 100% the answer to that question, I wouldn't be working at the NRC. I'd be out there on the consultant trail answering and fixing a bunch. I'd be a rich man like my friend Gary Smith over here.
Why you say Gary, not Janet?
But I said rich man, not
Oh, okay.
anyway.
You got it.
I mean, but you're rich in a lot more ways than he is. But let me answer it this way. One of my most dearest friends in the whole wide world is a brother named Carl Mack. And he just left the executive directorship of NSBE, so you know where I'm going. Carl has dedicated his life for the last 10 years trying to help America answer the question to get more students of color into the engineers and scientists. Because in this country, every year, we hire more foreign engineers into America's companies than engineers of color, because there are just, I mean, there's more jobs than for, actually, if we employed every engineer that graduated with a degree every year, we still wouldn't have enough engineers to fit the jobs, because of what Dave and I have been talking about here, is that the exodus and the input coming in. And so I think one reason is, and this is a small reason, is corporate America doesn't understand the true value of bringing on this person that don't think like everybody else, don't have the lenses of everybody else, and how, and this is one of our strengths, I think, we value the diversity of thought that results from bringing in people that don't all think alike. Okay? So back in the day, the source was that nuclear engineering submarine guy coming out of the Navy as that source, but they all came from the exact same culture, the Admiral Hyman G. Rickover culture. By the way, every Navy nuke engineer all interviews from the exact same four-star admiral before they come in. And they have to fit this mold. And Rickover would kick you out with a 4.0 grade point average from the Naval Academy or any other source if you didn't fit his idea of what a nuclear submarine guy was. So I think that part of the fault is on industry. We're looking for someone who will do what? What's the word we heard at linkage all last week? Fit.
Fit.
They're looking for somebody who fits. Anybody who knows, has spent any time as a practitioner in diversity inclusion, knows that out-of-the-box thinking is how we get the innovative ideas and the thought processes. That fit means comfort level. We don't want somebody to challenge the way we think. They don't fit in. We have a technical training center in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and one of my first early things was to go down there and give them diversity and inclusion training. And I talked to the guy who ran the school, and I said, so tell me about what you got here. I almost dropped on the floor when I heard, well, you know, we got some white folks here, and we got a few black folks, couple of Hispanics, and the rest of us are rednecks. I said, excuse me? He said, we'd hire a few more women to be instructors, but they don't fit in with our way of talking and listening to our jokes and stuff. They might get offended. I'm happy to say that gentleman is no longer employed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And so I think that's a part of the problem, is that if you went through an academic trip, you got a quality education and a quality grade point average. I'm telling you, I don't know when you were looking, but today there are engineering firms out there just headhunters are employing those people left and right.
Okay, thank you.
And let me just get a little practical tip.
One right here.
If you can, particularly students, come to DC for an internship. It is a great way to get into the federal government, into these agencies. Sometimes you have to leave home. Sometimes, though, there are opportunities in, across the United States and other places, but try for the internships. That is the best way in, especially for students.
Okay, did you have something you want? She had a comment, I can't lose it.
To answer that question on another personal level, I studied aerospace engineering, and I'm a computer science major, and now I'm doing real estate. And why? It's because I became a pregnant teenage mother in high school. So while my other colleagues, they were able to do internships I'm taking care of a child. So even though I was in aerospace engineering and computer science, I'm a computer science senator, I got this child. And now when I tell my daughter, it's like my number one thing is not even for her to get to college, it's not to become pregnant. So she's graduating this year, so that's what's happening to me and some of my friends is we're like pregnant. And so I'm helping, right? That's the, and it answers back to your question.
Right.
What's helping so the sponsorship, I think might need to skip college and actually go down to high school.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
You would say that, well, where's your mother? My mother's working and going to school while, I'm
Right.
And so that's what is happening that I see.
Thank
That
you.
we have the degrees, but we're,
And the league has programs that reach back to high school, is that right? That reach back to the younger women, so we want to talk about that. There was some people in the back I don't want to miss. They say we don't have a lot of time. I don't know if it can get stretched or not. Yes.
This will be part comment and solution, hopefully. I think you have a great point, and it kind of echoes everything that I just heard. Because one of the questions is about the strategy. How do you move from most of your audience, and we're very proud of our students, are mid to senior level people in this room. Right? So the question is, how do you move from industry mid to senior, maybe non-technical because of varying backgrounds, into government might be one part of it.
Yeah.
But I think the other part is, I'm going to give an example of KPMG, most of you know. They created a program called the PhD Project. And what they began to do was target mid to senior level leaders into academia, because academia is predominantly white male.
Yes.
And we don't always do very successful. I started as a computer science major, and within Cookman, my path was very different, ended in international relations, but I'm an HR person, right, at a really large organization, Walmart. And then you add technology. I'm in the Bay Area, global e-commerce, high competition for wages. We want to bring in a lot of external talent into business.
Right.
So we are looking at our college students, but to one of my peers, a lot of college students have chosen their majors. So you have to go to other organizations, National Academy Foundation. They deal with high school students in major industries. So I think the strategy is kind of twofold. Get us before and then get us later. Because as African American women, we have different socioeconomic backgrounds, different paths. So what's your strategy for bringing mid to senior level people that have strong competencies, analytical ability, manage huge budgets, P&L, well-rounded exposure education, everything that you're talking about. I think there has to be a plan from a diversity and inclusion standpoint to bring you, re-engage you, as your mid to senior level, and then bring you into government. That's one strategy I think you might approach it. KPMG is doing a good job of it because they're getting you after you've had kids, after you've gone back into industry, and then say, hey, come into academia and now teach minority or diverse students, because it's harder in education as well for them to matriculate in these technical science STEM fields. So hard question strategy, but that's
Thank you. Thank you. One recommendation I also have is that, as with so many of us being very qualified, very skilled, and not being able to get in the door in the traditional ways, I have recommended to many people in its work, find the Chief Diversity Officer. Find the Chico. Introduce yourself. Don't assume it will not work. Assume it will work. Ignore the noise you hear, because they are committed to us. They may not be able to find us. When we go there, I've recommended that to my sons as they've been looking for jobs. I said, call that person, let them know who you are, send your quals, and see what happens. Because quite often it is relationships. They're getting so many resumes and things, but they're looking for us. And sometimes it's just, the lid is off. Don't assume that it's not going to happen. Do you think if you called any of these three that you would not get your resume in the hands of the right people? This is it. And they are special, and they are also plentiful. So we need to make sure that we're not removing ourselves from the opportunity early, because there are a lot of us there. We have to find the right spot. This sister over here who has the degree and still to get the opportunity, that's ridiculous. And I bet you that story is sitting at every table. So we need to address that. There was one more question in the back.
Yeah, hi, good morning. I just actually have a comment, and I wanted to bring the discussion back around to something that was discussed earlier. So I'm hearing in the room a lot of conversation about influence, and so I wanted to just make a comment and bring it back to the discussion that the panel was having earlier regarding the comments about, I guess, the Housewives of Atlanta and the show. And so I want to make sure, because we have several individuals at different stages of their career in this room, and I want to make sure that individuals understand the viewpoint about influence and just how important that is. So we have individuals here that are seasoned employees that have been working for several years, and also individuals that haven't entered the workplace yet that are still pursuing their educational degrees and then will be entering the workplace. But please know that influence is very important, and so that what you see on TV does not have to be reality in the workplace. And it's your job, it actually is your job when you're in that workplace, to assure you that what those individuals see on the Atlanta Housewives is not in the workplace, and that they shouldn't feel that because they see that on TV, that they feel that you are acting the same way. Because I assure you that the African American women that work with us and those that are in this room, we act nothing like those individuals that are on that Atlanta Housewives show, and we should not. And so for the panel, I appreciate you bringing the point up, but I couldn't sit because I knew I would be driving home tonight saying, you gotta say that, you gotta say something. And so thank you, Kathy, for telling me. But I wanted to just make that point very clear, because influence and perception is reality, right? So the reality is that you want to make sure that you're the most professional, the most capable African-American woman that they know, so that when they see that on the Atlanta Housewives, that's something that totally could be staged, because the African-American women that I work with each and every day in the workplace are extremely professional, capable women, and that's not the stereotype, or that's not the vision that I have of them. So I just wanted to make that comment, and I appreciate you guys for letting me bring that up.
Thank you. Where's my timekeeper? I don't know what I have.
There's like one more question at this table
Okay,
here.
one more question, yes.
Thank you. Captain, you answered this question. You used the phrase quality education. Let's talk about that, because in conjunction with recruiting.
Yes.
Because one of the issues that strikes me is, as someone who's on the downside of one's career, is that where you guys go to look for folk who are coming out of school is a problem. I'm going to just throw the word out there, okay?
Yes.
HBCUs do get overlooked. There is this notion, talk about stereotyping that goes
Yes.
on in terms of the quality of one's education.
Yes.
There is this notion that if you come, you have to come, and I'm a big proponent of the Ivy League schools, so please don't, I'm not hating, okay?
I am a very proud Morehouse mom.
There you go.
Okay? So
And,
let's make it clear. Let's make
and
it
by the
clear.
way, I'm a proud Tuskegee mom with
Right?
a son with a physics degree with emphasis in mechanical engineering, who also has a law degree, okay?
Need
So,
to see me.
so
Come see
from,
me.
and his law degree is from an HBCU too, from Texas
see
Southern
me.
University, which is where I have my law degree.
Yeah.
So my point is though that you know, this young woman is from Bethune-Cookman. My Carla's and my mentee who went to take a test while you guys. I'm sad that she's missing you.
Yes.
But she's interested in a lot of what you all were talking about career-wise. Is taking a test. She's at Bethune-Cookman. I just think it would be worth a couple of minutes to
Yes.
have you guys talk frankly about that and the quality of education piece.
Yeah.
Because, you know, once we get out of school, there's an expectation that that piece of paper is going to open some doors. There's
Absolutely.
also an expectation that the piece of paper represents a quality education.
Right.
And sometimes that isn't true.
You're exactly
On
right.
on both points, if you
That's a-
could. Thank you.
That's a great point. I will tell you this. Probably one of my most immediate issues that I'm tackling right now is exactly what you spoke of. We do, in fact, spend a considerable amount of time in HBCUs at the NRC because I have a program manager. Thank you. I have a colleague that's my program manager, Tawanda Smith, who is the MSIP program, Minority Serving Institution Program Manager. And we spend somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million a year grants to only MSIPs, that's HBCUs, HSIs, tribal colleges, universities, and when she can steal some sweep-up money, she even exceeds those numbers. And so we go to Bethune-Cookman, we go to Tennessee State, we go to Fort Valley, and we have 3 projects on probabilistic risk assessment that's being done by Fort Valley. It's not being done anywhere else in the nation. So we understand and we value that. But that's still part of my problem. I'm having, over the next 3 months, monthly meetings with the hiring officials. Now we don't, HR does the announcements and whatever else, but once the applicants come in, they're scored by the part of the agency that has the opening. So my difficulty is they are prone to say, well, this Harvard 3.2, it's got to be better than this South Carolina State 3.85. It's just the nature of going to Harvard, right? Well, South Carolina State has a nuclear engineering program just like they do at MIT. And so what is it about this individual that makes you think they got a better education than this one did? Because that's like saying, wow, Walmart is a wonderful company that makes lots of money, and anybody that comes from Walmart must be better than someone who came from Target.
Oh, you're going to get me in trouble. No, you didn't go there.
I'm pandering. Come on, let me pander here. And so what that's to say is that that individual may have had nothing to do with the success of that place. So everybody that comes from an Ivy League is not, in my case, it's usually Georgia Tech, Penn State, those that are within driving distance of the NRC that happen to have quite a alumni following. Naval Academy is another big one. We have a lot of Naval Academy grads. So I'm talking about unconscious bias and micro inequities and those concepts to an individual that says, you know, if I'm looking at an application, I'm looking for characteristics that remind me of one of the most impressive people I know.
Me.
That's me. I'm looking for people from the South who are Catholic, used to fly airplanes, spent 31 years in the Navy, commanded 3 times. I'm looking for, and unconsciously, I mean, if you haven't heard Gary Smith's presentation on that same unconscious bias, if I can quote Gary, that machine starts to run in the back of your head long before you realize it's running, looking for those traits. Okay?
One thing that we do notice when we've done studies on the schools that people are recruiting from, it's not the Ivy thing that you might expect. It's actually statistically significant. It's a predictor. If you take the regional manager, for example, of that location, it will disproportionately be that school, whatever that school is.
Right.
You know, and quite often it might be, okay, University of Colorado. How do we have so many people, University of Colorado? Then you look, regional managers from that school.
Yeah.
And so it's taking a look at that, and once you, and I know all of you all recruit from HBCUs heavily, but it is definitely introducing it and then asking the alum who's there to be very active in it. So we go to that HBCU alum and do that. And I'm glad you go to the smaller HBCUs, because we do see
Absolutely.
everybody's going to Howard, Spelman, Morehouse. I mean, it's just
And
Hampton.
Let me just give a little plug for my agency. One of the things we do is, because we are an accountability office, we measure and monitor everything. So as we are hiring people, I look at the data on who we are hiring once a month at least. We're in a big recruiting now. So we know where we are standing. We also look at the end of the cycle and look further beyond the numbers and the racial and ethnic issues. Where did they come from? Where are we getting our students, and where are we getting our new employees, and seasoned people too, so we're looking both. And we look at that and make improvements each year. We hold our managers accountable. We will ask, why didn't you pick Janet? Why didn't you pick Carolyn? Because they look quite the same to me. You need to give me a lot of good reasons, and it can't be because of the school, and it can't be because of the major. She was an economics major. We're looking for public administration. That does not fly. We do not have a requirement that says only public administration majors.
See,
So
when
we
that
take
happens
steps
inside
to hold
the HR
people
piece,
accountable
that's wonderful.
because our leadership also cares. So if the leadership isn't on board, it's a harder battle to fight, but it's important to do and to keep looking at the data and the numbers real time as well as post session. So it's important to do, to fight that unconscious bias.
Closing thoughts. I think we have to wrap up. Closing thoughts from each of you, starting with Dave. 2 or 3 things, 1 or 2 things that you want this group to know about what it takes to be successful, or your closing thoughts after all this conversation we've had.
I'm going to start with what I talked about before. You got to own it. And if you walk away with one thing today, it's own it. So the 5 things I talked about. The other piece is don't undervalue the value of networking, right? So you have a great opportunity today. There's 3 people here. I'm going to give you a quick example. I spoke at a haiku conference down in Florida about 3 months ago. There was probably 100 students in the room. I told all 100 students to reach out to me on LinkedIn. 6 connected with me on LinkedIn. 3 of them got interviews to be interns at the Fed. Okay? So there's the value. Now let me tell you another thing. Social media is here to stay, right? The resume is a dying breed. It's almost dead. You need to make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date and current. That's where companies are going to. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn, David Harmon, on LinkedIn, if you connect with me, there's a big hint there, right?
It's a test.
Please,
Started.
and this is very important. Do me a favor. I have, 5,000 people on LinkedIn. I don't know how many I have. But don't send me the, I'd like to connect with you. Don't use the take the time, spend 30 seconds and say, hey, you spoke at this conference this morning. Even if you didn't like me, I really liked what you said. I'd love to connect with you and talk more about opportunities at the Federal Reserve because we pay more than any other government agency that you heard about. So that and perseverance, right? So just because you get no once doesn't mean it's no, right? Follow up. If you really want, find the 10 companies you really want to work for and connect and figure out who you can connect. If you can get in that door and meet anybody, that's going to give you such an advantage than sending a resume or sending an email. In person still works. So remember that.
Thank you, Dave. Carolyn.
I would just echo some of the things we've said before. Doing good work takes care of a lot of things. So do your best, whatever you do. If you are students, please look for internships. That is the very best way to get into the federal government. My email address is taylorcm@gao.gov. I would look forward to hearing from you. We have some announcements opening up probably soon. So, gao.gov under careers. But it is a pleasure to have been here and to had a chance to talk with you all today.
Thank you. Tony.
Thank you. Every time I come to these kind of events, either as a participant or as a panelist, I'm always interested in what people are reading. And so if you're reading something interesting, please let me know. I'd love you to send me an email and let me know what it is. But I have my latest read here that I'd like to share with you. See how thin it is? It's a really simple read. I read 80 pages of it on the flight from Atlanta last night, coming back from the linkage conference that we were at together. It's by Laura Liswood, and it's called The Loudest Duck. Okay? The Loudest Duck, the title. It's moving beyond diversity while embracing differences to achieve success at work. In the Chinese parable, the loudest duck is the first one to get shot. And so in the Asian culture, they don't speak up. It's a part of their culture to not complain about how things are going or you're not getting paid enough or etc. But in our culture, we have a different idea. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if you want to affect change, you have to bring change up and make sure people hear you and understand, be capable of communicating that desire for change well enough to where it's receptive to your leadership and management, but it's all about your culture. My culture in aviation, you may not know this, after every Blue Angel show, the pilots go into a room and heavily critique each other to its absolute nth degree. Hey, you were 6 inches off on the pass that we did, and when we did that knife edge, you were 3 seconds late to the middle. We are our worst critics. We believe in bringing up those because you get better when you talk about what you didn't do well. But I went to work in the nuclear submarine guy culture. I got there and I'm saying, man, we don't do this very well. We don't do that very well. They're like, you're not from around here, are you? So I'm having to change the way I communicate in this different and new culture in order to affect change. Now, Gary Smith spoke at our executive leadership seminar just 3 weeks ago. The average score for an individual coming to give a presentation was 4.1 since 2008 when we first started doing these. Gary's score was a 4.47, the highest score to ever be received by a speaker. And I'm telling you that 5 years ago, he would have got a 1.9. Does anybody who's heard Gary do a presentation know that he is right there? Telling it like it is, in this different culture and environment, but the timing was, Gary and I have been talking about doing this, and Janet and I have been talking about doing this since I got there in 2010. The timing wasn't right. They're right now. So understand the culture of your agency, your organization, and be a participant in it, because doing it the wrong way does more harm than it could ever do good. Okay? So I thank you for being here this morning.
Tony, Carol, and Dave, thank you. Let's give it up for them. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.